John Bennett had run into Gurdjieff in Constantinople in 1919, I think, and had become, over those years, a sort of leading figure of the Gurdjieff system in England.
Coombe Springs, when I first went there, was run by John Bennett. And John Bennett was the leader with a capital L. He certainly was a man of tremendous intellect and energy.
When I came to about 16, I found some talks by this guy John Bennett, who ran a Gurdjieff group in Kingston. And I started. Someone lent me his talks, and I suddenly realized there was a Gurdjieff group in England. And from then on, that was my idea, that as soon as I was out of this school business, I would go there and see if I could join a group.
I think we'd known about Bennett. I'm sure then or very soon after we were going to his lectures in London and What Are We Living For, and all that. It was absolutely thrilling. And so we became fully involved in Mr. B's group, Mr. Bennett's group, called the B Group, I think, and stayed, I think, every fortnight weekend at Coombe Springs.
Mr. Bennett was a master. He was great. I was impressed by his stature, by his looks, by his size, and by his blue eyes. I wasn't so impressed by his authority, having been brought up in a very free way. I just found all that a little bit sort of master worship. I didn't like it. People lowering their voice when he came round and things like this. I thought that was not on.
We met once a fortnight at Coombe, and we then reported back on what efforts we'd been making to remember ourselves and to observe ourselves and to observe other people and how bodies functioned and how our emotions and thinking were carried away by all sorts of influences. And this went on for a long period, and some benefit. Now, alongside with that self-examination was the practice of the movements, which Gurdjieff had picked up in the Middle East over the years and developed, I think, to some extent on his own. And the music and the piano and the movements, and that was a practice that we were invited to do once a week.
You had to be empty, in fact, and conscious, otherwise you couldn't do them. And I found occasionally, not often, but occasionally, you could actually do it without the thinking and the... I mean, they were very complicated, some of them, but I did like that because I'm a physical person, so I like being in my body much better than in my head. I mean, you know, the other part was I can't say I enjoyed very much.
One of Gurdjieff's things was, you know, you gave people work to do that was completely unfamiliar and would be most likely to bring them out of their comfort zone.
It was very hard work. I mean, it was called the work.
Yeah.
And intentional suffering was one of the things, you know.
June Sori Cookson, who later became Rosianna. I mean, she was the secretary, but you couldn't read her writing. I mean, she hand wrote all her letters, and she was the first person who wrote to me from Coombe Springs. But I couldn't read. It took me about a week to decipher what she'd written.
I can't explain in detail what the Gurdjieff thing was all about. But basically, Gurdjieff said that most of us are asleep all the time. We imagine we can make decisions. We imagine that we're free agents, but we're not. We're complete slaves. And so a lot of these exercises were to demonstrate that what he said was true. And then we were told, don't believe what I say, prove it to yourselves.
Here we were climbing the Gurdjieff ladder. Mighty hard work, you know. It was called the work,
yes,
and it was the work. it was all very serious. And yes, and the thought of just surrendering and the power of Almighty God would do all the difficult things that you could begin to do yourself was a huge relief.
It was such a relief to have the Latihan. I mean, wow. And it was those, after being open, I mean, I cried all first through Latihan, the first Latihan, tears pouring, and I love you, I love you, I love you. And then I got terribly, really felt as if I was somebody and me, and that was very interesting because I'd always been retiring, and it was quite frightening in a way, but I enjoyed the power. Suddenly I had the power to be me.
I was in a neighbour's flat, and suddenly, on the table, I saw a book with Subud in its title. And my friend said, "Oh, it's somebody that's visiting. Well, where is she? Where is she? Where is she?" And now this lovely woman, who fortunately I see at congresses, and is a close friend of a friend who's just moved down to Lewis, came in, and apparently she still talks about the fact that I absolutely hounded her to know how and where I could get hold of it. So, that's how I heard about Coombe Springs.
We were all ushered into a room, and Bapak had Iksan Ahmed with him, and he lined us up in a row, and Iksan and Bapak went from person to person. And it was extraordinary because nothing happened for a bit. And then suddenly there was a crash and somebody had fallen to the ground. And then moments later someone started crying. And moments later than that somebody started laughing. And after what seemed a long time, it was said finish and the whole thing was over. And it was very strange.
It was in May 1957. In the middle of the night, I had my bed by the window in Belsize Park Avenue, and in the middle of the night there was a toot toot, and I looked through the window. I said, "Who on earth is hootering at this time in the morning?" And down below was Lambert GIBBS, at the time called Peter GIBBS, architect, and he was there with Melinda in a little open Austin 7. And so I said, come up, and they came up to the flat, and they started to tell me all about this new experience. They'd just been open, they were elated. I thought they'd been on some drug scenes, and I was a bit worried. And I thought, what on earth are they doing? So, they're flaming, and they're all sort of high. And they said that this man, Park Subud, had come and he'd changed the whole thing in Coombe Springs. It was amazing, and they did what was called a latihan, and they were asked to go in a room and to let go, and they did amazing singing, and things were happening, and it was just incredible. They had no idea what it was all about. They had no idea what was happening to them, but it was great.
I remember the excitement in the whole building, and I was cooking with Annika King down in the kitchens, and Annika knew all sorts of Indonesian dishes. And it was, we made a lovely fruit salad. So I thought anybody would like fruit salad. And she made all sorts of different rice dishes and sort of eggy dishes and salads and things we thought that they would like. And Mr. B was very busy, and he was down in the cellar choosing all his wines. And of course he was very disappointed when he realized that Bapak didn't drink wine. He was a Muslim.
Nobody knew what to believe. I mean, nobody could explain what they were doing. And for me, that is what. That and listening to the latihan in the Jami Chunatra made me realize that this is how this seems real. There's something real here.
Bapak came in, and I sort of suddenly became very nervous. And Bapak said, and who are you? And I sort of just shook and said, "I don't know," and I ran out of the room.
One of the Gurdjieff things was a series of very interesting movements that you had performed to very strange music, very powerful music, powerful in the sense of emotions and powerful in the sense of almost like martial movements. And the Indonesian helpers who were with Bapak watched us doing these moves, and they started laughing. Well, of course, that was a terrible thing to do, because we all took each other desperately seriously.
Mr. Bennett was there ahead of me, just in the front, singing and dancing like a monkey. And I thought, gee, what a strange thing to do, a man of his stature, he knew the Lord so-and-so and the film actors and the Queen, and, he was quite a big guy in the English upper class kind of society. And there he was dancing like a monkey. I thought, if they only saw him, his reputation would fall and crash.
I'd read very little, hadn't really talked to anybody very much. So I said to lovely Raffaella Cummings, who was taking me across, just a minute, what actually am I doing? What actually is Subud? And she said, oh, it's all right. In Subud you come to know yourself. So I said, oh, sorry, that I couldn't cope with. No, there's no way that I could cope with knowing about myself at this point in my life. It's bad enough as it is. I really couldn't cope with that. And she said, no, it's all right. In Subud, you come to know yourself with compassion, which actually I have used many a time and oft in my trundlings round the world as international helper as I think, a very succinct description of what happens to you.
There was this incredible hum around Coombe, that there were dozens of people being opened all the time. I was opened with 5 other people or 4 other people, I can't remember exactly, and with about 5 or 6 helpers. And then 5 minutes after the opening started, something like 50 people came into the hall to do latihan. So it wasn't, it was like, it was full on.
And it soon became apparent that the latihan was completely individual. You hadn't got Bennett or Gurdjieff or Uspensky or anyone telling you what your experience was. You had this experience.
I felt eternity, I felt the space, I felt the peace. And I knew that, it has actually never left me since. That was my first experience of Coombe's Rings.